So today, or this morning, Blizzard have released a blue post talking about some upcoming changes for pretty much all healers at the moment, coming in 10.0.5. I believe most people are expecting this patch to hit sometime very late January, maybe February. So it's still a couple of months away. We're all assuming, but we don't really know. So far, we have a bunch of data mined information from the data that got pushed to the PTR, even though the PTR isn't available yet. It looks like there are changes for all of the Druid specs except Restoration. So the spec tree, for now at least, looks like it'll stay the same. But the class tree is getting some pretty significant improvements for Restoration specifically. So the Druid class tree at the moment is the only talent tree in the game that still has 3-point nodes. Late in the beta cycle, Blizzard went through and they changed all of the 3-point talents to 2-point talents for everyone. It looks like there will be one 3-point node remaining, which is I think it's called Lykara's Teachings, which gives you the secondary stat bonuses based on your form. Haste for casting, Verse for bear, I believe Mastery for cat form, things like that. So that will remain at 3 points. I don't think that's much of a problem considering the 2 points behind it are both 1-pointers and are very strong. The other change is that for Resto specifically is that the throughput nodes on the class tree, so the wild growth buff and the rejuve buff, are getting moved further up the tree, and a few more connecting nodes are being added. And what this effectively means is that Resto Druids will now be able to spec into a full dealing damage as a boomkin kind of scenario as their off damage in Mythic Plus, while still being able to get kick and all of the quality of life and defensive nodes that they generally want. At the moment, that isn't possible. If you want kick and you want like stamp raw and your defensive buffs and your throughput nodes and the capstone and things like that, well then you can't do that at the moment and take the boomkin nodes. But in 10.0.5, it looks like that will be possible, which is excellent news. I'm really happy with that. They've also thrown in a new talent down here, this foot icon. It looks like this is meant to be a choice between mobility or defense after the stamp raw node. So you can choose to either get the armor and health buff when you enter bear form temporarily on the left hand side, or if you go the right hand side instead, you can get a 5% movement speed and healing received buff for 6 seconds at 2 points. Overall, this is much better than the current class tree for Druids, so this is going to be a great change. Up next is Evoker Preservation Evokers. That these changes are buffs in some ways, but also nerfs in others. The main change for Preservation is to do with Temporal Anomaly. Now, at the moment, I think some people call this the Bronze build. It's what I've been playing this week. It's what I was playing through most of beta. It is, in my opinion, the most fun Preservation build, and what it does is spam Temporal Anomaly with the Resonating Sphere talent after it to augment it, which causes your Temporal Anomaly to apply Echo at 30% effectiveness, which with the Echo buffs on the talent tree turns this into 45% effectiveness to everyone it hits. Now at the moment, the current functionality is that Temporal Anomaly will pulse 3 times over 6 seconds, and each pulse will apply that echo to 2 targets, while also reapplying the shield. Now at the moment, the major downside for Temporal Anomaly, the kind of gate of Temporal Anomaly, is supposed to be its mana cost. It only has a 6-second cooldown and a 1.5-second cast, but it costs quite a lot of mana, and the way the Bronze build really gets around this is they take the node on the tree that returns mana for disintegration casts. So what effectively happens is you spam Temporal Anomalies out on your party, which applies your echoes. So then instead of using your essence on echo, you can now use your essence on disintegrate to do damage and get mana back. The really enjoyable part about this in keys is that you can have far more echoes out than you would usually be able to do. So even though they're only echoes at about half the value of a normal echo, you can quite easily get echo on the entire party very often. And it's quite fun for a few reasons. The first is that it allows you to currently, I guess you could say, it allows you to abuse Lifebind, and it also allows you to abuse Golden Hour. Because these are kind of like standalone mechanics that get applied by Echo but aren't reduced by the effectiveness of Echo, they can be very strong and, in my opinion, very fun. What's changing is instead of Temporal Anomaly pulsing 3 times over 6 seconds, it's now just going to effectively pulse once. It'll just apply the Temporal Anomaly shield to up to 6 allies it passes through, and the same thing with the Echo. Now, like I said, this can be, I guess, construed as a buff and a nerf. It's probably a buff in raid, and it's probably a buff in quality of life, but in some situations it's also quite a heavy nerf. The big benefit of the current functionality is that even if, let's say, it's only you and the tank in melee range, or you and or the tank and one other melee in melee range, you still get full benefit out of your Temporal Anomaly. Whereas with the 10.0.5 version, it looks like you'll need a relatively stacked group to really make Temporal Anomaly worth it. The current talent, which is the choice node for Resonating Sphere, is to then make your Temporal Anomaly apply to 3 targets every time it pulses instead of 2. Now this talent, the choice talent, is changing so that instead of shielding 1 additional target, your Temporal Anomaly will now reduce the cooldown of your Empower spells by 5 seconds. The other thing I should mention here is that Temporal Anomaly, the ability itself, is going from a 6-second cooldown to a 15-second. Quite a heavy nerf if the absorb amount isn't adjusted accordingly. The reduction to the cooldown of your Empower spells is actually quite nice, but Temporal Anomaly, the overall effect of it no longer pulsing, is going to be a pretty heavy nerf. At the moment, it's quite fun to be able to, based on your positioning, you can do things like Temporal Anomaly where you know the tank is going to be or where the tank is standing, and on the first pulse you can apply something like Reversion, and on the second pulse Dream Breath or a Living Flame. You can actually pretty reliably use all 3 Echo applications from one Temporal Anomaly, which won't be the case in 10.0.5, unfortunately. We'll have to see how this plays out. Overall, I don't think it's a huge change, but what I consider to be the most fun version of Preservation, it's a bit of a kick in the pants. The other change is that Time of Need is changing from a 90-second cooldown to a 60-second cooldown. This is just a straight buff. This is basically an emergency heal that you can proc effectively every pack. Most Mythic Plus builds already take this, even though I would say most builds probably don't take Temporal Anomaly. So to a lot of people, all the Temporal Anomaly changes won't mean much of anything other than perhaps a raid buff, and the Time of Need change, again, for most Mythic Plus builds, is just a straight buff. Verdant Embrace is also getting a tooltip change. It's quite nice to see this happen. People figured this out very early on in beta, and a lot of content creators have been repeating this over and over again because there are still a lot of people who don't realize that Verdant Embrace can be used on yourself. So it's nice to see that the tooltip will get changed to reflect this accurately. The only thing Preservation needs now is to make the Mastery tooltip say the same thing, because just in case people don't know, Preservation Mastery says that it increases the healing on allies who have a lower percentage health than you. What the Mastery does but doesn't say is that it also has full effect on all self-healing, regardless of your health percentage. Next up is Monk's Mistweaver. So the Bone Dust Brew talent and the Attenuation talent after it are both being removed for Mistweaver. It says here that the talent position has changed, but the Blizzard Blue Post says that it's being removed, and a few new talents are being added. So the old, I believe it was Legion weapon talent, I think, was Burst of Life, which caused Life Cocoon to kind of splash heal allies when it expires. So that's coming back. Unfortunately, this one, along with the kind of main Mistweaver change, which is the return of Shaylun's Gift, are both talents that I'm not quite sure what roles they're supposed to fill. We'll have to see, I mean, if people take them or how good they end up being. I don't have particularly high hopes at the moment, unfortunately. But it is really nice to see that Restoral and Revival are getting their healing increased by 100% when not in a raid. This is the same kind of mechanic that a lot of other healing cooldowns have, like Divine Hymn and Tranquility, and it's great to see that the same thing's being applied to Mistweavers, especially after a recent change which I think almost doubled Revival's healing towards the end of beta. Having it increased in dungeons by double again is going to turn Revival into quite a chunky heal. So Shaylun's Gift is returning. For those who don't know, this was a ability in Legion from the weapon. It was a 2-second cast that effectively was like a big spot heal on somewhat of a timer. The timer being the cloud spawning. So you could basically spend clouds to heal targets. In Legion, this also worked with Soothing Mist, so that if you cast Shaylun's Gift while channeling Soothing Mist, it became instant cast instead of a 2-second cast. I believe the data mining at the moment is this is the tooltip from Legion, so we're not sure if this 83% of spell power is going to be the coefficient or not on 3 allies. I hope it isn't, because that is exceptionally weak. That's less than a Vivify Cleave heal. It's not great. We'll have to see once the PTR becomes available what this spell really looks like. So along with Shaylun's Gift, there's a new talent that's being added as a choice node. So the choice is going to be between Xiaohao's Lessons and Veil of Pride. So you can either choose to create a cloud that you can spend with Shaylun's Gift every 8 seconds by default, or you can talent into reducing that to every 4 seconds while in combat, or you can choose to get a buff based on how many clouds you spend. From what we understand at the moment, it seems like these lessons are completely random, and the duration of the buff is what is increased by spending more clouds. So up to 30 seconds. I'm not a big fan of the random aspect of it, but the buffs themselves are very strong. The data mined values for this and the blue post values for this are slightly different. I'm assuming that the blue post is the more up-to-date figures and the data mining is just a little old or outdated. We'll have to see once the PTR goes live. In the blue post, it says that the Lesson of Fear is a 15% DR with a 20% haste buff, even though here it only says 15. This is a crazy strong buff. If you can have this up for 30 seconds when you need it, this is fantastic. The problem, like I said, is that it's random. So maybe you get the haste buff and the damage reduction, maybe you get critical strike, maybe you get damage and healing duplication. We don't know. Overall, I'm pretty interested to see where this goes and how this gets iterated upon over time. I'm pretty sure that what we see here in the data mined information isn't what's going to go live. So I'll be interested to see how this changes over time. I'm actually quite happy to see Bone Dust Brew go. I think the main problem, for me at least, with Bone Dust Brew was that it was in some ways quite a random cooldown, and it had quite a few kind of limitations. And I just hope that the talents that take their place don't end up having the same weaknesses. As far as Paladins go, I haven't seen anyone really talking about this, but this, in my opinion, is a pretty enormous change for Holy Paladins as well. So what's happening is that Avenging Crusader, what people usually call melee wings, is being changed. So at the moment, this is just the alternative to regular wings. So instead of the, I believe it's the crit buff, you can instead take the melee wings version, which causes you to deal damage with your Judgment and Crusader Strike to then heal 3 injured allies for 250% of the damage those abilities deal while wings is up. This is fantastic in PvP at the moment, like borderline overpowered. It almost single-handedly makes Holy Paladins good in many PvP environments just because of melee wings. And I am very excited to see what kind of effect on PvE this cooldown can have. The reason why it's strong in PvP is because it has very high uptime, and that is because of a PvP talent that effectively allows you to activate melee wings when your allies take critical strikes, which means it's up very, very often. The downside, obviously, in PvE is that that talent doesn't apply, and then the uptime of melee wings is very low, which makes it not great. But the change in 10.0.5 is that instead of a 2-minute cooldown, melee wings will be going to a 45-second cooldown, 20-second duration down to 12, and instead of having a mana cost, it will just have a 5 holy power cost. Now, the way the melee wings healing mechanic works at the moment is the exact same mechanic as Mistweaver's Ancient Teachings, and that is it will always heal injured targets if possible, but it won't prioritize the most injured targets. It's random. Now, one of the major criticisms I have for Mistweaver right now is that sometimes you press your big damage to heal ability like Rising Sun Kick, and it heals someone who's on 99% health instead of the guy on 10% health. And sometimes it works fine, but sometimes it feels bad. The major benefit melee wings has is that it heals 3 injured allies instead of 1. It also heals for significantly more, and Judgment hits for more than RSK anyway, I'm pretty sure at the moment. So this has some pretty big potential to be almost like a burstier cooldown version of Ancient Teachings for Paladins. I'm very excited to see how this goes. The other part of this I really like is that it allows you to combine a few other things as well, mainly Divine Toll. If you really need some like heavy burst cooldowns, you will be able to effectively start an encounter or start with 0 holy power, press Divine Toll, go straight to 5, press Avenging Crusader, use the 5 to go back to 0, which activates your Blessing of Dusk and Dawn, and obviously gives you some very powerful cooldown based throughput and damage, which is nice. I mean, I'm really excited to play with this actually. I think this could be fantastic. It's also worth noting that the healing from Avenging Crusader, the 3 injured allies healed for 250% of the damage done with Judgment and Crusader Strike, is also copied by beacons. So yeah, Efflorescence of the Sunwell is being changed to be slightly less random in nature. At the moment, it has a 30% chance for your Holy Light to generate an additional Holy Power, and it's being changed to be a guaranteed extra Holy Power every 3 casts, which overall is the same thing, but less random, which is great. It's a little strange to see Blizzard going to the trouble of taking away some of the random aspects of talents from other healers and then leaving it or even adding them into Mistweaver. So the other change, which is quite nice, especially for the casting version of Holy Paladin, is the change to Tower of Radiance. At the moment, you only gain Holy Power with your Flash of Light or Holy Light on beacon targets, and the change coming is that you will have a chance to gain Holy Power when using those abilities on anyone, even without beacon, based on their current health. Now in the blue post it says that this is going to be 100% chance if they're 50% health or below. So I'm assuming this is going to be, for most situations, almost a guaranteed Holy Power. This is quite a large buff to the casting version of Holy Paladin, like quite a large throughput buff. So I guess we'll take that as a win. That's fantastic. The other minor change is for PvE at least, is to Blessing of Winter. Instead of giving a small frost damage and slow buff, it now returns effectively 15% mana over 30 seconds to a friendly healer. Now it says a friendly healer. This has the same verbiage or wording as Innovate, which is also usable on the player. So I'm assuming that Blessing of Winter will have the same functionality, but until we can test the PTR, we don't know. Priest. Now, discipline changes. There is quite a lot here. All excellent changes for discipline. First up, Dark Indulgence, the talent at the top of the tree that causes your power of the dark side to be 20% stronger, is changing to allow Mind Blast to gain an additional charge and reduce its mana cost by 40%. Now for the Dark Disc, or actually really any disc, this is a fantastic change. The second charge of Mind Blast is going to work very well with Twilight Equilibrium, being able to weave your Shadow and Holy damaging abilities together more effectively, and the mana cost reduction is quite substantial. Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death have the highest mana cost of Discipline's rotational abilities at the moment, so a 40% reduction on that is going to be quite noticeable. Embrace Shadow, which causes Shadow Covenant to last an additional 4 seconds, is being buffed to 8 seconds. That's just a straight win. That's great. The larger change, which to some might not seem like much, is that Harsh Discipline is changing. Now at the moment, what it does is causes effectively every 4 smites to buff your next penance. The problem with Harsh Discipline at the moment is that it's difficult to fit your 4 smites in between each penance, and that is because often you are pressing your other kind of rotational abilities between your penances, which means you don't have enough time for smite. So you're pressing your Power Word Shield on cooldown. You would be pressing Solace, but to play Harsh Discipline at the moment, every Priest build basically drops Solace to take the Power Word Shield passive instead, because they don't have the globals to use Solace when they want to be pressing Smite. Same deal with Mind Blast. Mind Blast is a good button to press in some builds, but again, it's another global that isn't Smite when you still always want to be pressing 4 Smites between every penance. The Harsh Discipline change is allowing your Solace and Mind Blast to count as for your Smite casts. Fantastic change. Again, also works really well with Twilight Equilibrium. This is just great. I'm really happy with this Harsh Discipline change. Pain Suppression is going to change to basically be able to be talented into 2 charges with a choice node. I don't think this is a particularly good or strong change. The Pain Suppression heals your target is also being doubled, that talent, the choice node. The 2 charges of pain suppression might help in some situations, and on paper it seems like it could be good. The problem is that you don't really have any spare talent points, even at the top of the tree, to spend on this. Painful Punishment is being buffed so that each bolt of penance extends the duration of your dot, Purge the Wicked, or Shadow Word Pain by 1.5 seconds instead of 0.7, so it's being doubled. This is great. This is something I actually asked for or mentioned in my Dark Disc video. Anything that allows your expiation to feel less punishing is a win. I don't think it'll be enough to really make expiation free or like a minimal downside talent, but it is an excellent buff, especially for single target. Once discs get a decent amount of haste and they play with things like talents like Train of Thought, it won't be long until discs can effectively press their Purge the Wicked once and keep it up on a target the entire fight. Now this is actually quite a large, once this is possible, that will be a huge mana longevity buff. At the moment, Purge the Wicked is one of the most expensive spells that discs press on a regular basis, and the ability to talent into something that can almost make it infinite duration is very strong. Power Word Solace is getting a small numerical nerf, but it's also getting baked into a couple of other damaging or damage increasing talents, which will, I think, put Solace pretty much back on the map. I imagine if these kind of changes all go live, then Power Word Solace will be the de facto talent again for mana, rather than the Power Word Shield mana return talent. The loss of Dark Indulgence, this Power of the Dark Side effectiveness is increased by 20%, is being baked into Power of the Dark Side baseline, which is going to be really nice again. Stolen Psyche is being adjusted. So at the moment, Stolen Psyche only buffs your Mind Blast Atonement Healing, and it's changing to buff your Shadow Spell Atonement Healing, which means it will affect Mind Games, Schism, Mind Bender, I'm pretty sure, and obviously your Purge the Wicked, Shadow Word Pain. Overall, fantastic buff again. There's a lot of small steps in the right direction from these data mine changes. This is the kind of polishing adjustments that can turn a fun spec like Disc into a real joy to play and very powerful in many environments. Shadow Covenant is also just going to baseline turn Penance into a shadow ability, so this almost, I feel like, makes Shadow Covenant mandatory. This is now a button that's going to do a lot of upfront healing, which can then buff your Schism, Divine Star, Penance, Mind Blast, everything by 25%. Along with Stolen Psyche, could turn that up to more like 50% or close to. And then with things on top of that, like Power of the Dark Side, means that a fully buffed Shadow Penance is going to be a very meaty atonement heal. Holy Priest is getting a little bit of love as well. The main change here is that the 2 Holy Fire nodes at the top of the tree, Imperial Blaze and Burning Vehemence, are changing locations, they're swapping. And Burning Vehemence is getting an additional mechanic tacked onto it, which is that your Holy Fire deals 30% of its initial damage to all enemies within a few yards of your main target. Now, we don't have the PTR yet to test how exactly this works. This could be 30% of your Holy Fire upfront damage effectively duplicated onto multiple targets, or it could be 30% of it split among multiple targets. We're not quite sure. Whichever way you cut it, this is a pretty good buff for Holy Priest, and it's a buff in their kind of like their weakest damage dealing niche at the moment. So that's really good to see. The other, I guess, quite small or seemingly unassuming buff is actually quite enormous for Holy Priest, and that is the Prayer of the Virtuous, which at the moment causes your Prayer of Mending to effectively gain 2 extra charges at 2 talent points. And what it's getting as well now is that it increases the maximum stacks as well as the jumps. So at the moment, the baseline functionality of Prayer of Mending is that it can stack up to 10 times, and each cast is 7 stacks. So the problem with that at the moment is if you have quite a lot of Prayer of Mendings out and AoE damage starts to go out, if 2 Prayer of Mendings bounce to the same target, you can lose stacks because it only stacks to 10. So if you have 2 7 charges that jump onto the same target, you would have 14 stacks, you now have 10, so you lose 4. This talent change is meaning that it can now stack to 14. Enormous change. Prayer of Mending is already my top heal in every single Mythic Plus as a Holy Priest. Being able to add I don't know, 30–20% effectiveness of prayer mending from this talent as well. Just this small change is going to be enormous. There are many situations where I can go into an AoE heavy boss fight with like 40 charges of Prayer of Mending out on the group, and then as soon as damage starts ticking and they jump around, if they jump around in an unfavorable pattern, I can lose half my charges instantly. So this change is going to be pretty big. And last but not least, or I guess least actually, is that Resto Shamans are getting a very small bit of love or a bone thrown their way, which is to give Healing Tide Totem the same treatment as Revival. I believe that this now means, well, once 10.0.5 goes live, this will now mean that all of the healer kind of raid 3-minute cooldowns, at least the original ones like Tranquility, Divine Hymn, now Revival, now Healing Tide Totem, will all have a 100% buff in dungeon environments or non-raid environments. For Resto, unfortunately, I don't think this is a very impactful change. Even now on my Resto Shaman, I usually don't run Healing Tide Totem at all. It just never feels impactful enough to use as a proper cooldown. If I need to press a big button to do some big healing, I press Ascendance, not Healing Tide Totem, and I don't think that this change is going to change that. Still a nice buff nonetheless. Thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.